Dakota Territory, 1879. A woman clutches 3 small children close as she steps down from a weathered train onto an unfamiliar platform. The journey has left dark circles beneath her eyes, but determination burns within them. In her trembling hand, she holds a telegram promising sanctuary. Around her neck hangs a silver locket, the last gift from her mother, containing a photograph of the man who promised to welcome her and her children into a new life. But fate has other plans. What awaits her is not the warm embrace of a waiting husband, but suspicious stares and cold rejection. The station master's words still hanging in the air. "Ma'am, there's nobody here by that name. Never has been." As the last train whistle fades into the distance, her children crying from hunger and exhaustion, a tall figure emerges from the shadows of the platform. His face bears the marks of fire and war, but his eyes widen at the sight of something familiar glinting at her throat, a locket identical to one he hasn't seen in 15 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Clearwater Junction as the twice-weekly train from St. Louis rolled to a steaming halt at the small wooden platform. April had brought the promise of spring to the Dakota Territory, though patches of stubborn snow still clung to the shadowed areas beneath the pines. The air carried the scent of wet earth and new growth, but neither could quite mask the coal smoke that belched from the locomotive. Hannah Mitchell gathered her 3 exhausted children close as she prepared to disembark. At 26, her face retained its youthful beauty despite the strain of recent years etched around her eyes. Auburn hair was pinned sensibly beneath a modest hat, and her green eyes reflected both intelligence and desperation as she surveyed the unfamiliar landscape. Through the grimy window, "Clearwater Junction, end of the line for this route," called the conductor, a heavy-set man named Phillips, who had shown unexpected kindness during the 3-day journey, occasionally bringing the children extra biscuits when no one was looking. Hannah straightened her shoulders, marshalling her courage. "Come along, children," she whispered. "Remember what I told you, best behavior when we meet Mr. Crawford." The triplets, Sarah, Samuel, and Sophie, had just turned 5. Identical in their solemn expressions and golden curls, they nodded in unison, clutching the small cloth animals Hannah had sewn during the journey to keep their hands occupied. With the conductor's assistance, Hannah managed to shepherd the children safely onto the platform, where her worn traveling trunk and 2 modest carpet bags were unceremoniously deposited beside them. The dark blue traveling dress she wore, once considered fashionable in Philadelphia, was creased and spotted from travel, much like her spirits. Clearwater Junction was nothing like she had imagined from Thomas Crawford's letters. Rather than the thriving community he had described, with a proper general store, church, and school, she found little more than a collection of weathered buildings scattered along a rutted dirt road. The station was merely a platform with a small ticket office attached. Beyond that stood what appeared to be a trading post, a modest inn, and perhaps a dozen small structures of varying sizes and states of repair. Hannah's heart sank as her gaze swept across the handful of people who had gathered to witness the train's arrival. None matched the description Thomas had provided in his last letter. "Look for a tall man with a reddish beard and a black hat with a silver band." "Mr. Thomas Crawford?" she inquired of the station master, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose. "He was to meet me and my children here today." The station master's brow furrowed. "Crawford? Don't reckon there's anyone by that name in these parts, ma'am." Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. "That can't be right. I've been corresponding with Mr. Crawford for over 9 months. He owns a cattle ranch just outside of Clearwater Junction. He sent this telegram 3 weeks ago confirming today's arrival." She fumbled in her reticule, withdrawing a crumpled yellow paper. The station master adjusted his spectacles as he examined the telegram. His frown deepened as he read the message. Arrive April 15th. Will meet you at station. Bring children. All is prepared. Thomas Crawford, Pinewood Ranch. Ma'am, I've been station master here for 8 years. There's no Pinewood Ranch and no Thomas Crawford that I ever heard of. He handed the telegram back, his expression shifting from confusion to pity. I'm afraid you might have been misled. The words struck Hannah with physical force. Misled, deceived, swindled. The implications crashed over her like a wave of icy water. The months of correspondence, the plans, the hopes, the last of her savings spent on train tickets, all built on falsehood. Perhaps he's merely delayed, Hannah suggested, desperation edging her voice. Or there's been some misunderstanding about the date. The station master shook his head. Possible, I suppose. But like I said, nobody round. Here goes by that name. Mama, I'm hungry, Sophie whispered, tugging at Hannah's skirt. Samuel and Sarah stood silently beside their sister, eyes wide as they sensed their mother's distress. Is there somewhere we might wait? Hannah asked, struggling to maintain her composure for the children's sake. An inn, perhaps? Pioneer Lodge is just down the way, the station master replied, gesturing toward a 2-story wooden building with a sagging porch. Though it's not cheap, Widow Simmons runs it fair. Hannah thanked him with a tight smile, though inside she was calculating. Rapidly, the meager funds she had set aside for emergencies wouldn't last more than a few days. After that... As the station master turned his attention to unloading mail from the train, Hannah found herself standing alone with her children and luggage, the April wind cutting through her insufficient coat. The train that had carried them west was already preparing for its return journey, steam billowing around its massive wheels. Within minutes, it would be gone, taking with it her last connection to the life she had abandoned. You folks need some help with them bags? A boy of perhaps 12 approached, eyeing the trunk with entrepreneurial interest. Yes, thank you, Hannah replied, managing a smile for the freckle-faced child. To the Pioneer Lodge, please. What is your name? Jack Miller, ma'am, the boy replied, already hefting one of the carpet bags. My pa owns the livery stable. You new folks settling here? Hannah hesitated. We had planned to join Mr. Crawford at Pinewood Ranch. Jack's expression shifted to one of confusion. Don't know of no Pinewood Ranch. The only cattle spread near here is the Broken Spur, belongs to Mr. Garrett. Mr. Garrett? Hannah repeated, grasping at this potential thread of information. Yes'm, Ethan Garrett. Big place about 8 miles, north. Keeps to himself mostly on account of... The boy trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Well, he was in the war. Got hurt bad. As Jack led them toward the Pioneer Lodge, Hannah's mind raced. Had Thomas Crawford given a false name? Was the ranch called something different locally, or had she truly been the victim of an elaborate deception? The Pioneer Lodge proved to be cleaner than its exterior suggested, though the lobbies sparse. Furnishings spoke of the frontier's practicality rather than comfort. The proprietress, Widow Simmons, was a stout woman with steel-grey hair pulled into a severe bun and sharp eyes that seemed to catalogue Hannah's circumstances in a single glance. Room for 4 is $1 a night, she announced without preamble. Includes breakfast, dinners extra, 25 cents per adult, 15 for children. Hannah swallowed hard, calculating rapidly. At those rates, her emergency funds would be depleted within a week. Thank you. That will be fine for tonight, she replied with as much dignity as she could muster. I expect to hear from Mr. Crawford by tomorrow. Something like sympathy flickered in the widow's eyes. Crawford, is it? Jack here says you mentioned Pinewood Ranch. When Hannah confirmed this, Widow Simmons exchanged a significant look with the boy, who shuffled his feet and suddenly found the floor fascinating. Mrs. Mitchell, the widow said, her voice gentler than before, I've lived in Clearwater Junction for 15 years. There's never been a Pinewood Ranch nor any Thomas Crawford hereabouts. Perhaps he's new to the area, Hannah suggested, though the hope in her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. No new ranches established in the last 2 years, Widow Simmons replied firmly. Times have been too hard since the drought. As Hannah signed the guest register with trembling hands, one of the children began to cry softly. Sophie, always the most sensitive of the three, had finally succumbed to exhaustion and uncertainty. Hannah gathered her daughter close, whispering reassurances she herself no longer believed. Your room's upstairs, first door on the left, Widow Simmons said, handing over a heavy iron key. I'll send up some hot water and sandwiches for the little ones. She paused, studying Hannah's face. No charge for tonight's dinner. Children look like they need it. The unexpected kindness nearly broke Hannah's composure. Thank you, she managed, her voice thick with unshed tears. Once alone in the small but clean room, Hannah settled the children on the narrow bed, helping them remove their shoes and coats. As they ate the simple sandwiches Widow Simmons sent up, thick slices of bread surrounding generous portions of ham, Hannah sat by the window, staring out at the darkening street. The silver locket at her throat suddenly felt heavy, its familiar. Wait now, a reminder of shattered hopes. She opened it, gazing at the small photograph inside, a handsome, bearded man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The image Thomas Crawford had sent during their correspondence, the face she had studied so often during the long journey west. Had he ever existed? Or was the photograph, like everything else, just part of an elaborate scheme to separate a desperate widow from her last resources? Hannah closed the locket with a snap, determination replacing despair. Deception or not, she had no choice but to forge ahead. Philadelphia held nothing for her. The modest home sold, her late husband's debts settled, bridges burned with the relatives who had made it clear that a widow with 3 young children was an unwelcome burden. Tomorrow she would inquire about work in Clearwater Junction. Perhaps the school needed a teacher, or the trading post a clerk. She had taught briefly before her marriage, and her husband's business had given her experience with accounts. Somehow she would create a new path, even if it wasn't the one that had brought her west under false pretenses. As darkness fell completely, Hannah tucked her exhausted children into bed, their small bodies curled together for comfort and warmth. She kissed each golden head, whispering promises that tomorrow would bring answers. Only when she was certain they were deeply asleep did she allow a single tear to trace its way down her cheek. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window pane, like restless spirits. In the distance, a lone rider moved through the darkness toward town, his broad-shouldered silhouette briefly illuminated by the moon before disappearing into the shadows once more. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The following morning dawned with unexpected brightness, as if nature itself refused to acknowledge Hannah's dire circumstances. She woke before the children, watching their peaceful faces as they slept, momentarily unburdened by the harsh realities that now confronted them. Sarah's arm was protectively draped over Sophie, while Samuel had somehow managed to claim the majority of the pillow during the night. The sight of them strengthened her resolve. These 3 innocent lives depended entirely on her resourcefulness. Hannah, dressed quickly in her one remaining clean outfit, a practical grey skirt and white shirtwaist that had survived the journey relatively unscathed. She pinned her hair with practiced efficiency, the routine so familiar she could perform it without a mirror. The silver locket remained at her throat, a talisman of sorts, though its promises now rang hollow. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of hot water for washing, delivered by a girl of perhaps 14 with a shy smile and curious eyes. Widow Simmons says, "Breakfast is ready whenever you are, ma'am," the girl said. "I'm Lily. I help around the lodge." "Thank you, Lily," Hannah replied. "We'll be down shortly." As Hannah gently roused the children and helped them dress, she maintained a cheerful demeanor that belied her inner turmoil. "Today we explore our new town," she announced brightly, "and perhaps we'll discover where Mr. Crawford might be." Samuel, always the most practical of the three, looked skeptical. "The man at the train said there's no Mr. Crawford, Mama." "There's often confusion with names in new places," Hannah improvised. "Perhaps he's known by a different name here." The dining room of the Pioneer Lodge contained 3 tables, only one of which was occupied by a traveling salesman engrossed in paperwork. Widow Simmons emerged from the kitchen bearing plates of flapjacks, bacon, and fried potatoes, a hearty meal that made the children's eyes widen with delight. "Eat up," the widow instructed. "Growing children need proper food." She set a steaming cup of coffee before Hannah. "When you're finished, I'd like a word, Mrs. Mitchell." Hannah nodded, her stomach tightening with apprehension, even as she encouraged the children to enjoy their breakfast. The food was excellent, but she found she could only pick at her own portion, her appetite diminished by anxiety. When the children had eaten their fill and were contentedly drawing pictures with a stub of pencil and scraps of paper provided by the kind-hearted Lily, Widow Simmons beckoned Hannah to join her at the far end of the room. "I've been thinking about your situation," the older woman began without preamble. "It's not my place to pry, but I've seen this before. Mail-order brides arriving to find no husband waiting. It's a cruel deception that happens more often than folks care to admit." Hannah's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I wasn't exactly a mail-order bride," she began. "Thomas and I corresponded for months. He seemed so genuine, so kind." Widow Simmons nodded sympathetically. "The convincing ones always do. They write beautiful letters, spin tales of prosperous ranches and comfortable homes, then vanish once they've gotten whatever money the women send for travel expenses or wedding preparations." The words struck home with painful accuracy. Hannah had indeed sent funds to Thomas, not for travel, but for supplies he claimed were needed to prepare for the children's arrival. "Building a proper nursery and classroom," he had written, "so that your little ones will feel immediately at home." "I see you understand," Widow Simmons said gently, noting Hannah's expression. "The question now is what you intend to do." Hannah straightened her shoulders. "I need work, immediately. I was a teacher before my marriage, and I kept my husband's accounts after his death. I'm not afraid of hard work." The widow considered this. "Clearwater Junction isn't much, but we're growing. The mining operation 10 miles north has brought new business. Town needs all sorts of services." "Is there a school?" Hannah asked hopefully. "Small one, but Preacher Miller handles the teaching himself," Widow Simmons replied. "You might speak with Mr. Finley at the Mercantile. He's been complaining about keeping his books since his eyesight started failing." Hannah nodded, grateful for the suggestion. "I'll do that today. And how much longer can my current funds secure our room here?" Widow Simmons waved a hand dismissively. "Don't worry about that just yet. I've rooms to spare this time of year. If you're willing to help Lily with some of the cleaning and laundry, we can work something out until you find your feet." The unexpected kindness brought tears to Hannah's eyes. "Thank you. I'll certainly earn our keep." "One more thing," the widow added, her expression growing more serious. "If this Thomas Crawford should suddenly appear or send word, come to me before you respond. Men who prey on vulnerable women don't simply disappear without trying to extract more from their victims." Hannah promised she would, though she had already begun to accept that Thomas Crawford likely didn't exist at all. After settling the children, with Lily, who had offered to show them the small garden behind the lodge where spring flowers were beginning to bloom, Hannah set out to explore the town and seek employment. Clearwater Junction proved larger than her first impression had suggested. Beyond the main street lay several side roads with modest homes, a small church, and what appeared to be newly constructed buildings at the edge of town. The Mercantile occupied a prominent position in the center of the main street, its windows displaying an eclectic assortment of goods from practical tools to colorful fabric. A bell tinkled as Hannah entered the surprisingly spacious interior, where shelves reached the ceiling and barrels of supplies created a maze-like layout. "Help you, ma'am," called a voice from behind the counter. Mr. Finley proved to be an elderly man with impressive white side whiskers and spectacles so thick they magnified his pale blue eyes to an almost comical degree. "Good morning," Hannah responded. "Mrs. Simmons suggested I speak with you. I'm Hannah Mitchell, recently arrived from Philadelphia." "Ah, with the little ones at the station yesterday," Finley nodded. "Word travels fast in Clearwater." "Sorry about your situation, ma'am." Hannah swallowed her embarrassment. "Yes, well, I find myself in need of employment. Mrs. Simmons mentioned you might need assistance with your accounts." Finley brightened. "Indeed, I do. These old eyes aren't what they used to be, and I've been putting off the ledger work for weeks." He peered at her curiously. "You have experience with bookkeeping?" "My late husband owned a small printing business," Hannah explained. "I managed all the accounts for 3 years after his illness began." After a brief discussion of her qualifications and a demonstration of her neat handwriting and quick mathematical abilities, Finley offered her position sorting through months of neglected ledgers. The pay was modest but fair, 50 cents per day, with potential for more once she proved her competence. "You can work at that desk by the window," he said, gesturing to a small table in the corner. "Bring the children if need be. Quiet ones aren't a bother." Relief flooded through Hannah. It wasn't the future she had planned, but it was a start, honest work that would allow her to support her children. As she left the Mercantile with a promise to begin the following morning, her step was lighter than it had been since stepping off the train. Her improved mood was short-lived, however. As she approached the Pioneer Lodge, she noticed a small crowd gathered outside. At its center stood the Triplets, wide-eyed and clearly frightened, clutched protectively by a distressed-looking Lily. Hannah rushed forward, heart pounding. "What happened?" she demanded, gathering her children close. "Men came looking for you, Mama," Samuel whispered. "Scary men." Lily nodded, confirming. "Two rough-looking fellows asking for Crawford's woman and the brats," she explained quietly. "Widow Simmons told them there was no such person here, but they didn't believe her. Said they'd be back." A chill ran down Hannah's spine. Why would anyone be looking for Crawford's woman when Crawford himself didn't exist? Unless, did they say anything else? Hannah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Only that someone in Bismarck had paid them to fetch you back," Lily replied. "Widow Simmons is inside speaking with Sheriff Burke now." Inside the lodge, Widow Simmons was indeed deep in conversation with a weathered man wearing a tarnished star on his vest. Both looked up as Hannah entered with the children. "Mrs. Mitchell," the widow said, "this is Sheriff Matthew Burke. I was just explaining your situation to him." Burke nodded gravely. "Ma'am, seems you've gotten yourself tangled in something complicated. Men asking after you aren't the sort we welcome in Clearwater." "I don't understand," Hannah said, confusion compounding her fear. "I've never been to Bismarck. I don't know anyone there who would send men to find me. Bounty hunters is what they are," Burke clarified. "Said someone's offering $200 for your return. Mentioned papers claiming you'd stolen property before fleeing east." "That's absurd," Hannah exclaimed. "I've never stolen anything in my life, and I've come from Philadelphia, not Bismarck." Burke studied her face carefully. "I believe you, ma'am. But those men will be back, and they're not the type to ask questions politely. Might be best if you and the little ones stay out of sight for a few days while I send telegrams to verify your story." As the implications of his words sank in, Hannah felt the room begin to spin. Someone had not only lured her west under false pretenses, but had seemingly laid a trap that was now closing around her. A trap that threatened not only her future, but her very freedom. Sheriff Burke's suggestion that Hannah and her children remain hidden seemed prudent, but the practicalities proved challenging. The Pioneer Lodge, while comfortable, was hardly a fortress. Widow Simmons offered her private quarters at the rear of the building, a small apartment separated from the guest areas, as a temporary sanctuary. "No one goes back there without my say-so," the widow assured Hannah as she helped relocate the family's meager belongings. "And I've got a shotgun I know how to use." Hannah was touched by the woman's protectiveness, but worried about imposing. "I can't ask you to risk yourself for us." "Not asking, I'm offering," Widow Simmons replied firmly. "Besides, those men give off the stink of trouble. Wouldn't want them in my establishment regardless." The triplets, sensing the tension, had grown unusually quiet. Always perceptive beyond their years, they huddled together on the small trundle bed in the widow's spare room, whispering among themselves with occasional worried glances toward their mother. "Everything will be fine," Hannah assured them, though. Her own confidence wavered. "Sheriff Burke is going to help us clear up this misunderstanding." "But Mama," Sarah ventured, her small face solemn, "if Mr. Crawford isn't real, who sent those men to find us?" The question cut to the heart of Hannah's. "Don't fears. I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll figure it out together." While the children settled in, Sheriff Burke had returned to his office to send telegrams to Philadelphia and Bismarck, seeking information that might explain the strange circumstances. Hannah provided him with details of her late husband's printing business, the names of former neighbors, and the law firm that had handled the sale of their home. "Nothing to do now but wait," Burke had said before departing. "Stay put, Mrs. Mitchell. I'll return once I have news." By late afternoon, the confinement had begun to wear on the triplets' patience. Used to being active, they fidgeted restlessly, until Widow Simmons produced a small box of wooden blocks and a tattered picture book that had belonged to her own children decades earlier. "It's not much," she apologized, "but might keep them occupied for a spell." As the children played quietly, Hannah found herself drawn to the window that overlooked the back alley. From this vantage point, she could see a slice of the main street, where the day's activities continued undisturbed. Wagons rolled past, townspeople went about their business, all seemingly unaware that bounty hunters were searching for a woman who had done nothing wrong. A movement at the edge of her vision caught Hannah's attention. A lone rider on a magnificent black horse had paused at the far end of the alley. Even at this distance, his imposing figure commanded attention, broad-shouldered and straight-backed, despite an apparent stiffness in his left arm. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but something about his watchful stillness suggested he wasn't merely resting his mount. "Mrs. Simmons," Hannah called softly, "do you know who that might be? The rider on the black horse?" The widow joined her at the window, squinting to see through the late afternoon light. "That's Ethan Garrett," she confirmed. "Surprising to see. Him in town. Usually sends one of his ranch hands for supplies." Hannah recalled Jack Miller's words about the owner of the Broken Spur Ranch, a man who kept to himself because of war injuries. "Is he dangerous? Ethan?" Widow Simmons looked surprised at the question. "No, not to decent folk. One of the most honorable men in the territory, despite what some say about his temperament. Fought for the Union, came back changed, like many did. Built the Broken Spur from nothing after the war." As they watched, Garrett seemed to sense their observation. He tilted his head slightly, the movement causing light to fall across his face. Even from a distance, Hannah could see the extensive scarring that covered the right side of his features. Puckered, skin that stretched from temple to jaw, pulling his mouth into a slight grimace. He touched his hat brim in a gesture that might have been acknowledgement, then turned his horse and continued down the main street, soon disappearing from view. He was watching the lodge, Hannah observed. Do you think he knows about the bounty hunters? News travels fast in small towns, Widow Simmons replied, and Ethan has always had a sharp eye for trouble. She patted Hannah's hand reassuringly. Having him aware of your situation might be a blessing. There's not a man for 50 miles would cross Ethan Garrett lightly. Before Hannah could inquire further, a knock at the front door of the lodge drew them both to attention. The widow's hand moved automatically to the pocket of her apron where, Hannah realized with surprise, she apparently kept a small derringer. "Stay with the children," the older woman instructed, her voice brooking no argument. "Don't come out until I call for you." Hannah gathered the triplets close as Widow Simmons disappeared into the main part of the lodge. Straining to hear, she caught only muffled voices, a man's deep tones followed by the widow's shorter replies. The conversation continued for several minutes before the front door closed again. When Widow Simmons returned, her expression was thoughtful rather than alarmed. "Sheriff Burke," she explained. "The telegrams brought interesting news." "He's learned who I supposedly stole from?" Hannah asked anxiously. "Not exactly." The widow settled heavily into her rocking chair. "There's no record of any theft charges against a Hannah Mitchell from Philadelphia or anywhere else, but—" she hesitated. "There is a Hannah Crawford wanted in Bismarck for allegedly absconding with financial documents from the estate of her late husband, Thomas Crawford." The name hit Hannah like a physical blow. "Thomas Crawford, but that's—" "The name of your correspondent," Widow Simmons finished. "Yes, according to records in Bismarck, Thomas Crawford was a wealthy cattle broker who died 6 months ago, leaving his estate to his wife, Hannah." "That's impossible," Hannah whispered, mind racing. "My husband was James Mitchell. He died of consumption in Philadelphia over a year ago. I never set foot in Bismarck, and I certainly never married anyone named Crawford. Sheriff thinks someone has gone to considerable trouble to create a false identity, making it appear that you're this Hannah Crawford, fleeing with stolen property." "But why?" Hannah demanded. "Who would do such a thing?" Widow Simmons shook her head. "Burke's still piecing that together. But he did confirm one thing. The men looking for you work for a William Blackwood, a banker in Bismarck, who claims to be the executor of Thomas Crawford's estate." The name meant nothing to Hannah, which only deepened the mystery. She had no connections to Bismarck, no knowledge of this banker or the real Thomas Crawford, if he had indeed existed. "There's more," the widow continued. "Burke's deputy spotted those bounty hunters talking with 2 men at the saloon, strangers who arrived on yesterday's train, just before you did. Seems they knew exactly when to expect you." A chill ran down Hannah's spine. "You're saying I was followed? That someone knew I was coming to Clearwater Junction?" "Looks that way, and they were mighty disappointed when no one met you at the station." Widow Simmons's expression hardened. "Burke thinks this whole scheme, the letters, the false ranch, all of it, was designed to lure you here, alone and vulnerable." Hannah's mind whirled with the implications. Someone had spent months crafting an elaborate deception, creating a fictional husband and future, all to bring her to this remote corner of Dakota territory. But the central question remained unanswered. Why? What could possibly be gained from such an elaborate ruse? As if sensing her thoughts, Widow Simmons leaned forward. "Burke asked if there was anything unusual about your husband's business or personal effects. Anything valuable that might have come into your possession after his death." Hannah shook her head slowly. "James's printing business was modest. After his debts were settled, there was barely enough for train fare and a small emergency fund." She paused, fingers automatically rising to touch the silver locket at her throat. "The only thing of real value I have is this locket, and it was my mother's before me." The widow's gaze fixed on the piece of jewelry. "May I see it?" Hannah hesitated briefly before unfastening the chain and handing over the locket. It was a beautiful piece, pure silver with intricate engravings and a small diamond at its center. Inside was the photograph of Thomas Crawford that had been sent during their correspondence. Widow Simmons examined it carefully, then passed it back with a thoughtful expression. "That's fine craftsmanship, old by the look of it. It's been in my mother's family for generations," Hannah confirmed. "She gave it to me before she died, saying it would lead me to where I belong. I always thought it was just a sentimental notion. Sometimes old sayings carry more truth than we know," the widow mused. "Burke suggested you and the children might be safer outside of town until this matter is resolved. The bounty hunters know you're here, and they're not likely to give up easily with $200 at stake." "But where would we go?" Hannah asked, desperation edging her voice. "We know no one here." A smile played at the corner of Widow Simmons's mouth. "Actually, there may be an option. Sheriff Burke spoke with Ethan Garrett this afternoon. That's why he was near the lodge earlier. Ethan has a small cabin on his property, away from the main house. Been empty since his foreman married and built his own place. Burke asked if you might use it temporarily, and Mr. Garrett agreed, to shelter complete strangers." "He did," the widow confirmed, "on one condition." "Which is?" "He wants to speak with you first, alone." Widow Simmons' expression grew serious. "He's waiting at the sheriff's office now, if you're willing." The walk to the sheriff's office felt interminable, though it was barely 100 yards from the Pioneer Lodge. Hannah had left the triplets in Widow Simmons's capable care after extracting solemn promises from each child to behave and follow instructions without question. She now moved quickly through the deepening twilight, her steps shadowed by Deputy Collins, a lanky young man with vigilant eyes who Sheriff Burke had sent as escort. "Don't worry, ma'am," the deputy assured her. "No one's going to bother you. With me around." Hannah appreciated his confidence, though she noted his hand remained close to his holstered revolver. The bounty hunters were evidently considered a genuine threat rather than a mere nuisance. The sheriff's office occupied a modest building between the telegraph office and what appeared to be a lawyer's practice. A single lamp burned in the window, casting warm light across the weathered porch. Deputy Collins rapped sharply on the door before opening it and ushering Hannah inside. The interior was Spartan but orderly, a desk piled with papers, a pot-bellied stove providing heat, and a row of 3 cells at the rear, all currently empty. Sheriff Burke stood as they entered, his weathered face creased with concern. "Mrs. Mitchell," he greeted her, "appreciate you coming. Hope I didn't alarm you with my message." "Under the circumstances, Sheriff, I believe alarm is an entirely appropriate response," Hannah replied with more composure than she felt. A movement from the shadowed corner drew her attention. There, seated on a bench beneath the window, was the imposing figure she had glimpsed earlier. Ethan Garrett rose to his full height, well over 6 feet, as he turned to face her. The lamplight accentuated the severe scarring on the right side of his face, a web of puckered tissue that continued down his neck and disappeared beneath his collar. His left arm hung slightly stiff at his side, confirming Jack Miller's comment about war injuries. Yet it wasn't the scarring that captured Hannah's attention, but his eyes, a striking shade of blue that seemed to pierce through pretense, assessing and evaluating with unsettling directness. "Mrs. Mitchell," Burke continued, "this is Ethan Garrett, owner of the Broken Spur Ranch." Garrett stepped forward, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with silver at the temples despite his apparent age of no more than 35. He inclined his head in a formal greeting, but did not offer his hand. "Ma'am," he said simply, his voice deeper than she had expected and roughened, perhaps by the same fire that had marked his face. "Mr. Garrett," Hannah responded with a slight nod. "Sheriff Burke says you've generously offered shelter for my children and me. I'm most grateful." "Don't thank me yet," Garrett replied, his tone neutral. "I have questions first." Burke gestured toward a chair. "Why don't you sit, Mrs. Mitchell? This might take a while." Hannah complied, smoothing her skirts with hands that trembled slightly, despite her efforts to appear calm. "What would you like to know, Mr. Garrett?" Garrett remained standing, his posture suggesting a man accustomed to command rather than comfort. "You arrived yesterday expecting to meet a Thomas Crawford," he began. "According to Burke, you've been corresponding with this man for 9 months, yet no one in Clearwater Junction has heard of him or his supposed ranch." "That's correct," Hannah confirmed, wondering where this interrogation was leading. "And now bounty hunters are searching for you, claiming you're actually Hannah Crawford, widow of the real Thomas Crawford from Bismarck." Garrett's gaze hadn't wavered from her face. "Quite a coincidence, wouldn't you say?" Hannah bristled at the implied accusation. "I assure you, Mr. Garrett, there is no coincidence because there is no connection. I am Hannah Mitchell, widow of James Mitchell of Philadelphia. I have never set foot in Bismarck, never met anyone named Thomas Crawford, and certainly never married him. Then how do you explain this elaborate deception? Someone went to considerable trouble to lure you specifically to Clearwater Junction." "I don't know," Hannah admitted, frustration edging her voice. "That's what I'm trying to understand myself." Sheriff Burke cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mitchell, perhaps you could tell us more about how this correspondence began. Might help us identify who's behind it." Hannah gathered her thoughts, recalling the first letter that had arrived shortly after settling her husband's estate. "It came in February of last year," she began. "A letter expressing condolences for my husband's passing and inquiring if I might be interested in corresponding with a gentleman seeking a wife. It was signed by Thomas Crawford, who described himself as a rancher in Dakota Territory." "How did he know of your husband's death?" Garrett asked sharply. "It was announced in the Philadelphia Inquirer," Hannah replied. "James's printing business had many clients who needed to be informed, and you agreed to correspond with a complete stranger." The skepticism in Garrett's tone was unmistakable. Hannah lifted her chin defiantly. "My husband had been ill for 2 years before his death, Mr. Garrett. I had 3 young children to support, mounting debts to settle, and relatives who made it abundantly clear that they considered us a burden rather than family. When a man who wrote with intelligence and apparent sincerity offered the possibility of a new beginning, yes, I considered it." Her directness seemed to catch Garrett off guard. His expression shifted slightly, the hard lines around his mouth softening. "The correspondence continued for months," Hannah continued. "Thomas's letters were detailed, descriptions of his ranch, the house he was improving for our arrival, his plans for the children's education. He sent photographs of himself and the property. Nothing seemed suspicious until I arrived and discovered it was all fabrication." "Did he request money?" Burke asked. "Only once, about 2 months ago. He explained that he was expanding the house to accommodate the children properly, adding a nursery and schoolroom. He asked if I might contribute to the cost of materials, since it was specifically for our comfort." Hannah's cheeks burned with embarrassment at the memory of how readily she had sent the funds, nearly $200, a significant portion of what remained from selling her husband's business. "And the final communication, the telegram confirming your arrival date?" Burke prompted. "It came 3 weeks ago," Hannah confirmed, "instructing me to arrive on April 15th, assuring me that all was prepared." Garrett had listened to this recounting with intense focus, his scarred features impossible to read. Now he moved closer, studying Hannah's face as if searching for something specific. "The photograph he sent," he said abruptly. "Do you still have it?" Hannah nodded. "It's in my locket." Her hand rose automatically to her throat, only to remember that she had removed the necklace earlier when showing it to Widow Simmons. "I've left it with my things at the lodge." Something flickered in Garrett's eyes, disappointment perhaps, or suspicion. "I'd like to see it." "May I ask why, Mr. Garrett?" Hannah countered, growing weary of being treated like a suspect rather than a victim. What possible interest could you have in a photograph of a man who likely doesn't exist? Burke and Garrett exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. It was the sheriff who finally responded. Mrs. Mitchell, we believe the man in your locket may indeed exist, but he's not Thomas Crawford. Based on your description and the timing of events, we suspect the photograph might be of Robert Garrett. The name meant nothing to Hannah. Robert Garrett? My brother, Ethan clarified, his voice tight. Missing these past 6 years, presumed dead after a stagecoach robbery near Bismarck. Hannah's confusion must have shown on her face, for Burke continued. Robert was carrying significant funds for the purchase of breeding stock. The stage was attacked, all passengers killed, bodies burned beyond recognition. Only Robert's personal effects, including his identification, allowed for positive identification. I don't understand, Hannah said slowly. You think the man who wrote to me, who claimed to be Thomas Crawford, was actually your brother, but you just said he died 6 years ago. I said he was presumed dead, Ethan corrected. His body was never recovered intact. The identification process was incomplete. A new possibility dawned on Hannah, one so outlandish she hesitated to voice it. Are you suggesting your brother might still be alive, that he's been living under a false name all these years? I'm not suggesting anything yet, Ethan replied, though the intensity of his gaze belied his measured tone. But I need to see that photograph. Hannah considered the request, weighing her lingering suspicion against the clear importance this held for the rancher. Finally, she nodded. I'll retrieve the locket from the lodge, but first I'd like to understand the arrangement you're proposing, Mr. Garrett. Sheriff Burke mentioned a cabin on your property. Ethan seemed to come back to the present moment with visible effort. Yes, small but sound, about 3 miles from the main house, isolated enough that bounty hunters wouldn't easily find it, close enough that my men can keep watch. And what would you expect in return for this sanctuary? Hannah asked directly. Her experiences had taught her that generosity from strangers rarely came without conditions. A muscle twitched in Garrett's scarred cheek, what might have been a suppressed smile on a face less marked by tragedy. Caution, I admire that. He crossed his arms, the left moving more stiffly than the right. In return, I ask only for the truth, whatever it may be. Before Hannah could respond, the door to the sheriff's office burst open. Deputy Collins stumbled in, breathless and wide-eyed. Sheriff! Fire at the Pioneer Lodge, he gasped. Started in the back room, spreading fast. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. My children! She was on her feet and moving toward the door before either man could react. Garrett caught her arm with surprising gentleness. My horse is out front, he said, already steering her toward the exit. Faster than running. Outside, an orange glow illuminated the darkening sky above the eastern end of town. Shouts and the clanging of an alarm bell filled the air as townspeople rushed toward the blaze. Garrett swung himself into the saddle of his waiting black stallion, then extended his right arm down to Hannah. Take my hand, he ordered. We'll reach them faster together. Hannah gripped Ethan Garrett's arm and swung up behind him with a strength born of desperation. The black stallion responded instantly to its master's command, surging forward down the darkened street toward the growing inferno that had once been the Pioneer Lodge. Wind rushed past them as they galloped, carrying the acrid smell of burning wood and the shouts of townspeople forming a bucket brigade. Hannah clung to Ethan's solid form, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might break through her ribs. All she could think of were her children, their small faces, their innocent trust that she would keep them safe. She had left them, even briefly, and now disaster had struck. As they approached the lodge, the full extent of the blaze became visible. Flames engulfed the eastern wing, where Widow Simmons's private quarters were located, shooting skyward with terrifying intensity. The main section of the building remained largely intact, though smoke poured from several windows. A crowd had gathered, passing buckets in a desperate but seemingly futile attempt to contain the fire. Ethan reined his horse to a halt at the edge of the crowd and dismounted in one fluid motion before helping Hannah down. "Where were your children when you left?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The back rooms, Widow Simmons's private quarters." Hannah gasped, already pushing toward the burning building. Ethan caught her arm, his grip unyielding. "You can't go in there?" "Those are my children." Hannah tried to wrench free, but his strength far exceeded hers. "And you won't help them by dying," he countered sharply. "Where exactly in the quarters? Which room?" Hannah forced herself to think. Through her panic, "The small bedroom on the north side. It has a window facing the garden." Ethan nodded once, his decision apparently made. "Stay here." He strode toward Sheriff Burke, who was directing the bucket brigade, and exchanged brief words before removing his coat and heading not for the front door, but around the side of the building toward the garden. "Mr. Garrett," Hannah called after him, but he didn't turn. "He knows what he's doing, ma'am," a voice beside her said. Deputy Collins had appeared. At her elbow, his young face streaked with soot. "If anyone can reach them, it's Garrett." Hannah stood frozen, torn between the instinct to rush into the flames herself and the rational knowledge that doing so might doom both her and her children. Around her, the efforts to fight the fire continued with grim efficiency. Men shouted instructions, women carried water, and a group had begun clearing nearby structures to prevent the blaze from spreading. "Where's Widow Simmons?" Hannah asked suddenly, scanning the crowd for the older woman. "There," Collins pointed to a figure seated on a bench across the street, attended by Lily and another woman Hannah didn't recognize. "She got out when the fire started, tried to go back for the children, but the smoke was too thick. Relief that the kind widow had survived mingled with renewed terror for her own children." Hannah began to pray, silent, desperate pleas directed skyward as tears streamed down her face. Minutes stretched like hours. The flames had now claimed most of the eastern wing, the roof collapsing with a terrible crash that sent sparks spiraling into the night sky. There was no sign of Ethan or the children. Hannah's legs threatened to buckle beneath her as hope began to fade. Then a shout went up from the garden side of the building. "He's got them! Garrett's got the children!" Hannah ran, pushing through the crowd toward the garden. Through the smoke and chaos, she saw a figure emerging from the shadows of the yard. Ethan Garrett, his shirt torn and face blackened with soot, carrying all three triplets. Sarah and Samuel clung to his neck, while Sophie was cradled in his right arm, her small face pressed against his chest. "Mama!" Sophie's cry pierced the night as she spotted Hannah rushing toward them. Hannah reached them in seconds, gathering her children into her arms with sobs of relief. They were alive, coughing from the smoke, frightened but unharmed. She fell to her knees, clutching them close, murmuring thankful prayers and reassurances. When she finally looked up, Ethan stood watching them, his expression unreadable through the soot that covered his scarred features. He had removed his shirt to wrap around Sophie, leaving his torso bare. The firelight revealed what his clothing had concealed, extensive burn scars that covered much of his right shoulder and chest, matching those on his face. "Thank you," Hannah whispered, the words wholly inadequate for what he had done. "I can never repay you." Ethan shook his head once, dismissing her gratitude. "They were by the window, like you said. Widow Simmons had the sense to keep them there when the fire started." He glanced back at the burning building. "She saved their lives. I just carried them out." Sheriff Burke joined them, his face grim beneath the dirt and sweat. "This was no accident," he said without preamble. "Fire was set deliberately, started in at least 3 places according to witnesses." Hannah tightened her hold on the children. "The bounty hunters?" "Likely," Burke confirmed. "They were seen leaving town about an hour ago, but could have doubled back. Or they hired local help." My locket, Hannah remembered suddenly. It was in the room with our belongings. Gone now, Ethan said, his voice flat, along with any proof. It might have provided. The implications of this statement hung in the air between them. Without the photograph in the locket, Ethan had no way to confirm whether the man who had corresponded with Hannah was indeed his long-missing brother. Before the conversation could continue, Widow Simmons approached, supported by Lily. The older woman's face was streaked with tears, her usually immaculate hair hanging in disarray around her shoulders. "Hannah, child," she called weakly. "The children, they're safe." "Yes, thanks to you and Mr. Garrett," Hannah assured her, rising to embrace the widow. "You kept them by the window, away from the worst of the smoke." Widow Simmons sagged with relief. "When the fire started, I knew it was no accident. Smoke came from everywhere at once." Her eyes hardened. "Everything I built, gone in minutes. 30 years of work. You'll rebuild," Lily said firmly. "Everyone will help." As the widow was led away to receive medical attention for smoke inhalation, Hannah became acutely aware of their precarious situation. All their belongings, meager as they were, had been destroyed in the fire. They had nowhere to stay, no clothing beyond what they wore, and bounty hunters still searching for them. "The offer stands," Ethan said quietly, seeming to read her thoughts. "The cabin on my property. You'll be safe there while this situation is resolved." Hannah looked at her children, their small faces smudged with soot and eyes wide with lingering fear. Whatever reservation she might have had about accepting help from this stern, scarred stranger had been incinerated along with the lodge. He had risked his life to save her children. That spoke more of his character than any words could. "We accept with gratitude," she said simply. Ethan nodded. "My foreman Jenkins is here with the wagon. We should leave immediately, under cover of the confusion." Within 30 minutes, Hannah found herself seated in a sturdy farm wagon beside her exhausted children. A few hastily donated supplies piled at their feet. Blankets, a change of clothing for each of them provided by townswomen, and food enough for several days had materialized through the generosity of Clearwater Junction's residents. The fire at the lodge continued to burn, though it was now contained to the original structure. Most of the town remained focused on the blaze, providing cover for their departure. Sheriff Burke approached as Jenkins, a taciturn man in his 50s, prepared to drive them out of town. "I'll continue investigating," Burke assured Hannah. "Both the false Crawford business and tonight's fire. I've sent additional telegrams to contacts in Bismarck about this banker Blackwood and the supposed Hannah Crawford case." "What about the locket?" Hannah asked. "It was the only link to whoever has been orchestrating this deception." "Describe it," Burke requested. "Every detail you can remember." Hannah closed her eyes, picturing the treasured piece. Silver, oval-shaped, with a small diamond at the center, intricate engravings around the edge, vines and small flowers. Inside, 2 compartments for photographs, though only one was filled with the picture sent by Thomas Crawford. The back had an inscription, "2 halves of 1 whole." At these words, Ethan, who had been adjusting the harness on one of the wagon horses, went utterly still. "Say that again," he demanded, turning to face her. "2 halves of 1 whole," Hannah repeated, puzzled by his reaction. "It was my mother's. She said it had been in our family for generations." Ethan reached inside his shirt and withdrew something that caught the distant firelight, a silver chain from which hung a locket identical to the one Hannah had lost. "Like this one?" he asked, his voice rough with some emotion Hannah couldn't identify. She stared in disbelief at the locket dangling from his fingers, the same size and shape, the same diamond at its center, the same intricate engravings. That's impossible," she whispered. Ethan opened the locket to reveal a faded photograph of a young woman with Hannah's features and coloring. "This was my mother's," he said. "She gave it to Robert before her death. Said it was half of a matched pair and that someday he might find its twin. Hannah's mind reeled with implications. My mother said something similar, that the locket would lead me to where I belong. I always thought it was just sentiment. Or something more, Burke suggested, looking between them with growing understanding. A family connection, perhaps. The possibility hung in the crisp night air that the elaborate scheme to bring Hannah to Clearwater Junction, the false correspondence, even the bounty hunters, might all be connected to these matching heirlooms. We need to leave, Ethan said firmly, closing the locket and returning it to its place against his chest. Questions can wait until you're safely at the ranch. Jenkins flicked the reins, and the wagon began to move away from the town and its burning lodge. Hannah held her sleeping children close, their weight both comfort and responsibility. Behind them, Ethan followed on his black stallion, a silent guardian in the darkness. As Clearwater Junction receded into the distance, Hannah found herself adrift in uncertainty yet again, but this time with the unsettling sense that she was moving not away from her past, but toward it. The journey to the Broken Spur Ranch took nearly 2 hours over rough terrain, the wagon's lanterns casting eerie shadows across the prairie as they traveled. The triplets had fallen into exhausted sleep almost immediately, huddled beneath donated blankets, their small faces peaceful despite the night's trauma. Hannah envied their resilience, even as she worried about the impact of such frightening experiences on their young minds. Jenkins proved as taciturn as his appearance suggested, offering only occasional comments about landmarks or warnings of particularly rough stretches ahead. Ethan rode several yards behind the wagon, his attention divided between their path and the dark landscape surrounding them, vigilant for any sign of pursuit. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, the wagon crested a gentle rise, revealing the broken spur spread below them. Even in the dim pre-morning light, the ranch's size and orderliness were impressive. A substantial 2-story house, constructed of timber and local stone, dominated the central area, surrounded by well-maintained outbuildings, corrals and barns. Beyond these structures stretched fenced pastures where dark shapes of cattle could be discerned, and in the distance a line of trees marked what appeared to be a creek or small river. "Doesn't look so broken to me," Hannah murmured, taking in the prosperous scene. Jenkins glanced at her, the ghost of a smile crossing his weathered features. "Name comes from the spur Mr. Garrett found here when he first claimed the land. Said it was a sign broken things could be made useful again." The simple explanation revealed more about Ethan's character than hours of conversation might have. A man who saw value in what others discarded, including perhaps himself after his war injuries. As they descended toward the ranch, lights appeared in several windows of the main house. By the time the wagon rolled into the central yard, a woman had emerged onto the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. "That's Mrs. Peterson," Jenkins explained. "Housekeeper. Mr. Garrett sent word ahead about your situation." The housekeeper proved to be a capable-looking woman of middle years, with graying auburn hair pulled into a practical bun, and shrewd eyes that assessed Hannah and the children with unconcealed curiosity. "You must be Mrs. Mitchell," she said without preamble, as Jenkins brought the wagon to a halt. "And these are the little ones. Poor mites. What a terrible night they've had." Her no-nonsense manner reminded Hannah somewhat of Widow Simmons, though without the underlying warmth the lodge owner had displayed. "Martha," Ethan addressed the housekeeper as he dismounted, "the children will need baths and proper beds. Mrs. Mitchell, too." "Already prepared the East Wing rooms," Mrs. Peterson replied, efficiently. "Water's heating, and I've set out some of Jenny's old clothes for the woman. They might run large, but will serve until proper things can be acquired." Hannah bristled slightly at being discussed as if absent, but exhaustion prevented her from taking offense. The promise of clean water and a bed for her children overrode all other concerns. With Jenkins's assistance, she managed to transfer the still sleeping triplets from the wagon to the house, where Mrs. Peterson led them upstairs to a spacious bedroom containing a large bed and a smaller trundle that had been prepared for the children. Bathrooms through there, the housekeeper indicated a connecting door. I'll help you with the young ones first, then you can tend to yourself. Together, they managed to gently clean the worst of the soot from the children without fully waking them, dressing them in oversized nightshirts before tucking them into the trundle bed. Only then did Hannah allow herself to consider her own state. Dress, torn and smoke-damaged, hair fallen from its pins, face streaked with tears and ash. "Go on," Mrs. Peterson urged, seeing her glance longingly toward the bathroom. "I'll sit with the children. Take your time." The bathroom proved to be surprisingly modern, with a large copper tub already filled with steaming water and a cake of lavender-scented soap placed nearby. Hannah nearly wept at the simple luxury after the night's ordeals. She shed her ruined clothing and sank into the bath, allowing the hot water to soothe her aching muscles and wash away the physical reminders of the fire, if not the emotional wounds. As she bathed, Hannah's thoughts turned to the astonishing revelation of the matching lockets. What could it mean? Her mother had never mentioned any connection to Dakota territory or to anyone named Garrett, yet the lockets were undeniably twins, too unique to be coincidence. And what of the elaborate scheme that had brought her west under false pretenses? If Ethan was correct, and the photograph in her locket had actually been his presumed dead brother Robert, the deception took on new dimensions. Was Robert Garrett alive, using the alias Thomas Crawford? If so, why lure Hannah to Clearwater Junction only to abandon the plan at the last moment? By the time Hannah emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a borrowed robe, her mind swirled with questions, but no answers. Mrs. Peterson had left a nightgown and simple day dress on the bed, both slightly too large, but clean and well made. A quick check confirmed the triplets still slept soundly, their ordeal mercifully forgotten in slumber. "I've prepared breakfast downstairs when you're ready," Mrs. Peterson said, reappearing at the door. "Mr. Garrett would like to speak with you once you've eaten." "Thank you," Hannah replied sincerely, "for all of this. I know our arrival is an inconvenience." Something like sympathy flickered in the housekeeper's expression. "This house has stood too empty for too long," she said enigmatically before departing. Hannah, dressed in the borrowed clothing, braided her damp hair into a simple plait, and after ensuring the children remained peacefully asleep, made her way downstairs. The main floor of the house revealed tasteful furnishings that balanced practicality with unexpected refinement. Leather chairs, solid oak tables, and shelves lined with books suggested a household that valued comfort and knowledge. Following the scent of coffee, Hannah found the kitchen at the rear of the house. Mrs. Peterson gestured toward a table already set with a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits still steaming from the oven. "Eat," she instructed. "You'll need your strength." Hannah hadn't realized how ravenous she was until the first bite crossed her lips. She ate with unladylike haste, the simple meal tasting better than any fine dining she'd experienced in Philadelphia. "The children will be hungry when they wake," she said between bites. "I'll prepare fresh for them," Mrs. Peterson assured her. "Little ones need regular meals, especially after fright." When Hannah had finished, the housekeeper directed her to Ethan's study at the front of the house. She found him standing at a large window overlooking the ranch yard, his tall figure silhouetted against the morning light. He had changed from his smoke-damaged clothing into clean trousers and a fresh shirt, though he'd forgone a jacket in his own home. "Mrs. Mitchell," he acknowledged her entrance without turning. "I trust you found everything satisfactory." "More than satisfactory," Hannah replied. "Your hospitality is extraordinary, especially toward strangers. Now he did turn, his scarred features composed into careful neutrality. "I'm not convinced we are strangers," he said directly. "The Lockets suggest otherwise." Hannah moved further into the room, noting the well-organized desk and walls lined with maps of the surrounding territory. "I've been thinking about that as well, but I have no knowledge of any connection between our families. My mother never mentioned Dakota Territory or anyone named Garrett." "What was your mother's name?" Ethan asked, his intense gaze fixed on her face. "Elizabeth Wilson," Hannah replied. "She died when I was 16. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or confirmation of a suspicion. "And her people? Where did they come from?" "Boston, originally, I believe. My father met her there during a business trip." Hannah frowned, trying to recall details from conversations long past. "Though I remember her mentioning relatives further west, she never spoke of them in detail." Ethan crossed to his desk and withdrew a small item from the drawer, his mother's locket. "My mother was Margaret Russell before she married my father," he said, opening the silver oval to reveal the photograph inside. "She had a sister named Elizabeth who left home at 17 after a family dispute. They never reconciled before my mother's death." Hannah's breath caught as the implications crystallized. "You think my mother was your mother's sister? That we're cousins?" "The timing fits," Ethan confirmed. "As do the matching lockets, family heirlooms passed to the two sisters before they parted ways." Hannah sank into a nearby chair, her mind reeling. "But that still doesn't explain the false correspondence, or why someone would go to such lengths to bring me here." "I have a theory about that," Ethan said, returning the locket to his pocket. "But it hinges on Robert and whether he's still alive." He hesitated, then continued with visible reluctance. "If he survived the stagecoach attack, he might have had reasons to remain officially dead." "What reasons?" Hannah pressed. Ethan's expression hardened. "The money he was carrying, $20,000 for breeding stock, disappeared after the attack. If he took it, you think your own brother staged his death to steal money?" Hannah couldn't hide her shock. "I don't want to believe it," Ethan admitted, "but it would explain much. Robert was always restless, resentful of our father's strict control. He and I quarreled before he left on that final trip. If he saw an opportunity to start fresh elsewhere with a small fortune, he let the implication hang unfinished. But why reach out to me years later? Why create this elaborate scheme to bring me to Clearwater Junction?" "The locket," Ethan suggested. "If Robert survived and somehow learned about our family connection, perhaps from papers among our mother's possessions that he took with him, he might have sought you out." Hannah considered this, frowning. "That still doesn't explain why he would arrange everything only to abandon the plan at the last moment, or why there are now bounty hunters claiming I'm Hannah Crawford, who stole documents from her husband's estate." Ethan's scarred features settled into grim lines. "No, it doesn't. But I intend to find out." He moved toward the door. "For now, you and your children should rest. You're safe here while we unravel this mystery." As he reached the doorway, Hannah called after him, "Mr. Garrett." When he paused, she continued, "If we are indeed family, I'd prefer you call me Hannah." A faint smile, the first she had seen, briefly softened his severe expression. "Ethan," he offered in return before departing. Left alone in the study, Hannah found herself drawn to the window where Ethan had stood earlier. The broken spur spread. Out before her, bathed in morning light, cattle in distant pastures, ranch hands already at work in the corrals, smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney. A productive, orderly operation that spoke of careful management and clear purpose. She had come west seeking security for her children, a fresh start after loss and hardship. Instead, she had found mystery, danger, and unexpected connections to a past she hadn't known existed. Somewhere in this tangled web of identities and deceptions lay answers that might finally explain her mother's cryptic words about the locket leading her to where she belonged. As if summoned by her thoughts, the patter of small feet announced the arrival of her children, refreshed from sleep and eager to explore their new surroundings. Their resilience never failed to amaze her. After all the upheaval and terror, they still approached each day with curiosity and hope. "Mama," Samuel asked, tugging at her borrowed dress, "is this our new home now?" The innocent question carried weight beyond the child's understanding. Hannah drew her son close, watching. Sarah and Sophie examined the books on Ethan's shelves with careful fingers. "For now," she answered gently. "For now." The rhythms of ranch life proved to be both foreign and oddly comforting to Hannah and her children. After the chaos of their arrival and the revelations about possible family connections, the structured routine of the Broken Spur offered a stability they had lacked since leaving Philadelphia. Mrs. Peterson, despite her initial brusqueness, revealed a softer side when it came to the triplets. By the end of their first full day, she had organized a small area in the kitchen where the children could help with simple tasks like rolling dough or sorting dried beans, activities that kept them occupied while Hannah assisted with household duties. "Never seen such well-behaved little ones," the housekeeper remarked as Sophie meticulously arranged biscuit cutouts on a baking sheet. "Most children their age are wild as jackrabbits." "Necessity," Hannah replied simply. When James fell ill, they had to learn patience early. Mrs. Peterson nodded, understanding in her eyes. Hard lessons often come too soon. The promised cabin that had initially been offered as their sanctuary turned out to need significant repairs, having sat empty since the foreman's departure. Instead, Ethan insisted they remain in the main house, in the seldom-used east wing that contained 3 bedrooms and a small sitting area. "The cabin can wait until we determine whether your situation requires long-term arrangements," he explained during a brief conversation over dinner their second evening. Sheriff Burke sent word that the bounty hunters have left the territory, at least temporarily. Hannah had noticed that Ethan took most of his meals separately, joining them only for dinner, and even then speaking little. Whether this was his natural inclination or consideration for their comfort remained unclear. His scarred features remained difficult to read, though she occasionally caught him watching the children with an expression that might have been wistfulness. On their third morning at the ranch, Hannah rose early, having grown accustomed to Philadelphia's schedule of commerce rather than the pre-dawn routines of ranch life. Finding herself alone in the kitchen, she set about preparing coffee and a simple breakfast before the household stirred. The peaceful task was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and closing, followed by boots in the hallway. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, clearly surprised to find her there. He was dressed for riding, his hat in hand, the early light emphasizing the stark contrast between his scarred right side and the handsome features that remained intact on his left. "You're up early," he observed, hesitating at the threshold as if uncertain whether to enter what had temporarily become her domain. "Old habits," Hannah explained, gesturing toward the coffee pot. "Would you like some? It's just finished brewing." After a moment's consideration, Ethan nodded and stepped into the kitchen. Hannah noted that he moved with a certain guardedness, keeping his scarred side angled away as much as possible, a habit she suspected was deeply ingrained. "I was about to ride out to check the north pasture," he said, accepting the cup she offered. "Jenkins reported a section of fence down yesterday." "The children and I could accompany you," Hannah suggested impulsively. "They've been curious about the ranch and some fresh air would do them good after being confined indoors." Ethan looked startled by the proposal. "It's 5 miles of rough terrain." "We wouldn't slow you down," Hannah assured him. "The children are stronger than they look, and I'm not unfamiliar with horses. Besides, I'd like to see more of the property." What went unspoken was her desire to learn more about this taciturn man who might be her cousin and whose life had become unexpectedly intertwined with hers. The mystery of the Lockets and the possibility that his brother Robert was somehow involved in the scheme that had brought her west remained constantly in her thoughts. After a moment's consideration, Ethan nodded. "I'll have Jenkins prepare the buckboard," he conceded. "There's a stream near the damaged fence where we can stop for a midday meal. Mrs. Peterson can pack provisions." 2 hours later, Hannah found herself seated beside Ethan in a well-maintained buckboard, her children secured on the bench seat behind them, wide-eyed with excitement at this unexpected adventure. The morning was clear and mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of prairie grasses and wildflowers. As they traveled, Ethan pointed out features of the ranch, the different pastures where cattle were rotated seasonally, the creek that provided water even in drought years, the line of distant hills that marked the northern boundary of his property. Hannah was struck by both the vastness of the operation and the evident care with which it was managed. "You've built something remarkable here," she observed, as they passed a particularly lush meadow where a small herd of horses grazed. "Built from necessity, expanded through persistence," Ethan replied, the wooden quality that often characterized his speech softening slightly. "When I returned from the war, I needed purpose. Land gives a man that, if he's willing to work it properly. And you came here alone." "With Jenkins," Ethan clarified. "We served together. He was there when—" He gestured vaguely toward his scarred face. "Pulled me from the fire after Chancellorsville. Said he figured that meant he was responsible for keeping me alive thereafter." It was the most personal information he had offered since their arrival, and Hannah recognized the significance of the disclosure. "He seems very loyal," she observed carefully. "Loyal to a fault," Ethan agreed, "especially when I didn't deserve it." Before Hannah could inquire further, Samuel called from behind them, pointing excitedly at a prairie dog that had emerged from its burrow to watch them pass. The moment for confidence had passed, but Hannah tucked away this glimpse into Ethan's history for later consideration. They reached the damaged fence around midday. While Ethan inspected the break, apparently caused by a fallen tree rather than human interference, Hannah spread a blanket beneath the shade of a cottonwood near the promised stream. The triplets, initially hesitant in the unfamiliar environment, soon warmed to the freedom of open space, collecting interesting rocks and chasing grasshoppers through the tall grass. "Stay where I can see you," Hannah cautioned, unpacking the substantial lunch Mrs. Peterson had prepared. "And remember what Mr. Garrett said about watching for snakes." "Yes, Mama," they chorused, though their attention remained fixed on a butterfly that had alighted on a nearby wildflower. Ethan joined them after securing his horse, accepting the plate Hannah offered with a nod of thanks. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes, watching the children's explorations with shared amusement. "They recover quickly," Ethan observed, "after all they've been through." "Children are remarkably resilient," Hannah agreed. "Though I worry about the long-term effects of so much upheaval. They've known little stability since their father fell ill 3 years ago." Ethan studied the triplets thoughtfully. "They seem well adjusted despite the challenges. You've done well by them." The simple compliment, delivered without sentiment or condescension, touched Hannah more deeply than effusive praise might have. "I've tried," she acknowledged, "though there have been times I feared it wasn't enough." "It's never enough," Ethan said quietly. "That's the burden of responsibility. Always knowing you could have done more, been better, protected those who depend on you more effectively." The words carried weight beyond the immediate context, and Hannah sensed he spoke from painful experience. "You're thinking of your brother," she ventured. Ethan's expression tightened. "Robert was 4 years younger. Our mother died when he was 12. I should have—" He paused, visibly collecting himself. Sheriff Burke sent a telegram yesterday. There's no record of Thomas Crawford owning property in Bismarck, but a man matching Robert's description using that name did work for Blackwood's Bank about 5 years ago. Hannah set down her plate, appetite forgotten. Then it was him. He is alive. It seems increasingly likely, Ethan acknowledged, though it doesn't explain why he would contact you or the connection to the Lockets. Could he have learned about our family connection through bank records? Hannah suggested. Perhaps he had access to information about my mother or her family. Ethan considered this. Possible. Blackwood's bank handles estates throughout the territory. If your mother had any connections to Dakota, records might have passed through their hands. But why the elaborate deception? Why not simply introduce himself as my cousin? Because he wasn't just making a family connection, Ethan replied grimly. He was setting a trap, though whether for you or for others remains unclear. The conversation halted as Sophie approached, proudly displaying a collection of smooth stones gathered from the stream bank. Hannah admired each one with appropriate enthusiasm, grateful for the interruption that allowed her to process this new information. When the children returned to their explorations, Hannah turned back to Ethan. If Robert is alive and was indeed Thomas Crawford, why didn't he meet me at the station as promised? What changed his plans? That's what concerns me most, Ethan admitted. Something or someone interfered with whatever scheme he had devised. The bounty hunter's appearance suggests Blackwood might be involved, but how and why remains unclear. As they packed up the remains of their lunch, Hannah's mind worked through the tangled facts. If her correspondent had indeed been Robert Garrett, using a false identity, and if Blackwood was somehow involved in both the original deception and the subsequent attempt to capture her through bounty hunters, a larger conspiracy seemed likely. "We're missing something," she said finally. "Some connection that would explain all of this." Ethan nodded, his expression grave. "Burke is continuing to investigate in Bismarck. Until we have more information, vigilance is our best defense." They had just loaded the children into the buckboard and prepared to depart when the crack of a rifle split the afternoon quiet. Ethan reacted instantly, pushing Hannah and the triplets down beneath the wagon's wooden sides. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his revolver and scanning the surrounding terrain with practiced intensity. Hannah clutched her terrified children close, their small bodies trembling against hers. "What is it?" she whispered. "Shooter on the ridge," Ethan replied tersely, indicating the rocky outcropping about 300 yards distant, "probably hoping to pick us off while we were distracted." A second shot kicked up dirt just feet from their position, confirming his assessment. The triplets whimpered in fear, and Hannah tried to calm them while her own heart hammered painfully against her ribs. "We're too exposed here," Ethan said, making a swift decision. "I'll create a distraction. When I do, you take the children to those rocks by the stream. Better cover there." Before Hannah could protest, he had rolled from beneath the wagon and fired 3 rapid shots toward the ridge, then sprinted to his tethered horse. In a fluid motion that belied his injured arm, he swung into the saddle and galloped directly toward the shooter's position, presenting a moving target that drew attention away from the wagon. Hannah seized the opportunity, gathering her children and making a dash for the rocky outcropping beside the stream. They reached the relative safety of the boulders as more shots rang out, these directed at Ethan's charging figure. "Mama, I'm scared," Sarah sobbed, clinging to Hannah's skirts. "It's going to be all right," Hannah assured her with a confidence she didn't feel. "Mr. Garrett knows what he's doing." From their position, she could see Ethan zigzagging his mount up the ridge, closing distance with the hidden shooter. The firing had stopped, suggesting the attacker was either reloading or repositioning. When he reached the top, Ethan disappeared from view behind the rocks. Agonizing minutes passed as Hannah and the children waited, huddled among the boulders. Then a final shot echoed across the landscape, the sound seeming to hang in the air. Before dissipating into silence, Hannah held her breath, eyes fixed on the ridge where Ethan had vanished. Had he found the shooter? Was he injured or worse? The triplets pressed against her, sensing her tension despite her attempts to appear calm. At last, a figure appeared at the top of the ridge. Ethan, leading his horse by the reins. He raised his arm in a signal that indicated it was safe to emerge. Relief flooded through Hannah as she guided the children back to the wagon. Ethan rejoined them minutes later, his expression grim but composed. "The shooter?" Hannah asked quietly, mindful of the triplets' attentive ears. "Gone," Ethan replied. "Found tracks leading to where a horse had been tethered, but he fled before I could catch him." He glanced at the frightened children. "We should return to the ranch immediately. It's not safe here." As they drove back at a pace that balanced speed with safety, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that the peaceful life they had begun to build at the broken spur was merely an illusion. Whatever conspiracy had brought her west was far from resolved, and those behind it were growing increasingly desperate in their attempts to find her. News of the shooting spread quickly through the ranch when they returned. Jenkins immediately organized extra patrols around the property boundaries, while Mrs. Peterson fussed over the children, plying them with warm milk and cookies to distract from their fright. Within hours, the broken spur had transformed from working ranch to fortress, with armed men positioned strategically and horses kept saddled for quick response if needed. Ethan sequestered himself in his study with Jenkins and two trusted hands, mapping the ranch's vulnerabilities and planning defensive measures. Hannah, after settling the exhausted triplets for a nap, found herself at loose ends, her nerves too frayed for mundane tasks, yet her presence clearly superfluous to the security preparations underway. She wandered onto the east wing porch where the afternoon sun provided warmth against the unseasonable chill that had descended following their return. The peaceful vista of rolling pastures and distant hills belied the danger that had so narrowly missed them hours earlier. "Penny for your thoughts," came a voice behind her. Hannah turned to find Mrs. Peterson approaching with a steaming cup of tea. Though given recent events, they might be worth considerably more. Hannah accepted the cup gratefully. "I was thinking about choices," she admitted. "How a decision made with the best intentions can lead to unforeseen consequences." The housekeeper settled onto the porch swing beside her. "You're referring to your decision to come west?" Among others, Hannah nodded. "If I hadn't been so desperate to escape Philadelphia, if I'd investigated more thoroughly before agreeing to marry a stranger, you might never have discovered your family connection here," Mrs. Peterson pointed out. "Never learned about your mother's past." Hannah sipped her tea thoughtfully. "I still know precious little about that. My mother rarely spoke of her family, only that there had been a falling out many years before I was born. Margaret, Ethan's mother, mentioned her sister occasionally," Mrs. Peterson offered. "Usually when she'd had a glass or two of sherry, said Elizabeth had run off with a traveling salesman against their parents' wishes." "My father was a publisher," Hannah corrected, frowning. "He owned a small printing house in Philadelphia." Mrs. Peterson shrugged. "People reinvent themselves out west. Maybe he started as something else." The simple observation sparked a realization. "Just as Robert apparently reinvented himself as Thomas Crawford," Hannah murmured. "Perhaps deception runs in the family." Before Mrs. Peterson could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A rider was coming hard up the main drive, his horse lathered from exertion. Hannah recognized Sheriff Burke's distinctive hat even before he reached the hitching post. Ethan emerged from the house as Burke dismounted, the two men exchanging brief words before glancing toward the porch where Hannah sat. Their serious expressions sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon air. "Mrs. Peterson, would you check on the children?" Hannah requested, setting aside her tea. I believe I'm about to receive news that concerns me directly. The housekeeper nodded, understanding the request for privacy. I'll keep them occupied for as long as needed. Hannah moved to join the men as they entered Ethan's study, noting the telegram Burke clutched in his gloved hand. Whatever news he brought had been important enough to justify an immediate ride to the Broken Spur rather than waiting for a messenger. Mrs. Mitchell, Burke acknowledged her with a respectful nod. Glad to see you're unharmed after this morning's incident. No thanks to whoever tried to kill us, Hannah replied. Do you have news about the shooter? Burke glanced at Ethan, who nodded permission to proceed. Not the shooter specifically, but I've received information from my contact in Bismarck that may explain why someone wants you silenced. He placed the telegram on Ethan's desk, where they could all read its contents. Background on Blackwood Stop, banker involved in land speculation. Throughout territory Stop, suspected of forging documents to seize valuable properties. Stop, Crawford. Worked as assistant before abrupt departure. 5 years ago. Stop, Crawford believed to have taken incriminating ledger showing fraudulent transactions. Stop, 15 homesteaders lost properties through suspected. Fraud, Stop Blackwood, desperate to recover ledger. Stop Hannah Crawford identity, created to justify search. Stop use extreme caution. Stop Hannah read the message twice, trying to absorb its implications. Blackwood created a false identity, Hannah Crawford, to justify searching for me. But why would he think I have this ledger? Because Robert sent it to you, Ethan suggested, his voice tight with controlled anger. Or led Blackwood to believe. He had, Burke nodded agreement. My contact believes Crawford, your Robert, was initially part of Blackwood's schemes. Something soured between them, and Robert left with evidence that could ruin Blackwood. But I never received any ledger, Hannah protested. The only things that came from Thomas Crawford were letters and the photograph for my locket. A sudden thought struck her. Unless, she turned to Ethan, the locket itself. Could something have been hidden inside it? A microfilm or small document? Possible, Burke acknowledged. Those lockets are old-fashioned, often with secret compartments or double panels. But my locket was destroyed in the fire at the lodge, Hannah reminded them. Blackwood doesn't know that, Ethan pointed out. He's still hunting for whatever evidence Robert took, and he believes you have it, knowingly or otherwise. The pieces were beginning to align in a coherent, if disturbing, pattern. Robert Garrett, presumed dead after the stagecoach robbery, had instead emerged years later as Thomas Crawford, working at Blackwood's bank. There he had discovered, or perhaps participated, in the banker's fraudulent activities before absconding with evidence. Somehow he had learned of Hannah's existence and initiated correspondence, possibly intending to use her as an unwitting courier or storage for the incriminating documents. But why me? Hannah asked, voicing the question that still puzzled her. Even if Robert discovered our family connection, why involve me in his schemes? Protection, perhaps, Burke suggested. If something happened to him, the evidence would still exist, held by someone with motivation to use it against Blackwood. Or revenge, Ethan said quietly. Robert always had a twisted sense of justice. If he learned about our family connection, to you, he might have seen poetic symmetry in using Blackwood's crimes to benefit his long-lost cousin. Hannah rubbed her temples, feeling a headache beginning to form behind her eyes. This still doesn't explain the current danger. If Blackwood believes I have the ledger, why try to kill me? Wouldn't that risk destroying the very evidence he's desperate to recover? The shooter today wasn't necessarily aiming to kill, Burke pointed out. Might have been trying to wound, capture, or simply frighten you into revealing the ledgers. Location, or things have escalated beyond Blackwood's control, Ethan added grimly. He's hired men who have their own methods, or he's grown desperate enough to eliminate you rather than risk exposure. The implications were chilling. Whether Blackwood wanted her captured or killed, Hannah and her children remained in grave danger as long as the banker believed she possessed evidence of his crimes. "What about Robert?" she asked. "If he's alive and behind the original deception, where is he now? Why didn't he meet me at the station as promised?" Burke and Ethan exchanged glances, neither apparently willing to voice their suspicions. It was Mrs. Peterson, who had entered silently with fresh coffee, who gave words to the unspoken concern. "Because Blackwood found him first," she said plainly, setting down the tray. "If this Robert took evidence of crimes that could ruin a powerful man, he's either in hiding, captured, or dead." The blunt assessment hung in the air like a physical presence. Hannah found herself hoping that the cousin she'd never met was merely in hiding, though logic suggested a darker fate. "The bounty hunter said someone in Bismarck had paid them to bring me back," she recalled. "That must have been Blackwood, using the false Hannah Crawford identity as justification. And when that failed, he escalated to more direct methods," Ethan concluded. "Today's shooter won't be the last attempt. What do we do now?" Hannah asked, looking between the two men. "We find the ledger," Ethan replied without hesitation. "It's our only leverage against Blackwood, and the only way to ensure your safety, in the long term." "But I don't have it," Hannah repeated. "I never received anything resembling accounting records." "Think carefully," Burke urged. "Was there anything unusual about the letters you received? Hidden messages, unusual phrasing? References to items or places that seemed out of context?" Hannah cast her mind back through the months of correspondence, trying to recall anything suspicious or coded. "The letters seemed genuine," she said slowly. "Detailed descriptions of the ranch, plans for our future together, inquiries about the children." She paused, a memory surfacing. There was one odd thing. In his last letter before the telegram, he mentioned sending a small gift for each child, carved wooden animals, said they were frontier creatures the children should recognize when they arrived. "Did they arrive?" Ethan asked sharply. "Yes, about a week before I left Philadelphia. 3 small wooden figures, a bear, a wolf, and a buffalo. The children have carried them everywhere since. They're upstairs with their other belongings now." Ethan was already moving toward the door. "Those carvings need to be examined." The small wooden animals lay on the dresser in the children's room, arranged carefully alongside the few other treasures that had survived the journey west. Each was approximately 3 inches tall, skillfully carved from dark wood and polished to a soft sheen. They appeared utterly ordinary, children's toys from a prospective stepfather. "May I?" Burke asked, picking up the buffalo figure. He turned it over in his hands, examining it from all angles before setting it aside and repeating the process with the wolf. When he reached for the bear, his careful inspection revealed something the others had missed: a nearly invisible seam running around the middle of the figure. With delicate pressure, he twisted the top half of the carving counterclockwise. It rotated smoothly, revealing that the bear was actually a container hollowed out to create a small hiding place. Inside, rolled tightly and secured with a thin thread, was a small piece of paper. "Empty," Burke announced, examining the wolf and buffalo more thoroughly. "Whatever was hidden has been removed from these two, or was never there," Ethan suggested, watching as Burke carefully unrolled the paper from the bear. It proved to be a small fragment torn from a larger document, containing only a partial list of numbers and initials, followed by what appeared to be a date, March 17th, 1874. Nothing that immediately identified it as part of the missing ledger, yet its secretive storage suggested significance. "Could be a page from the ledger," Burke concluded. "A sample, perhaps, or insurance that the rest exists." "But where is the rest?" Hannah wondered aloud. Ethan's expression darkened with realization. "Still in Philadelphia, most likely. Hidden somewhere in your former home or husband's business. Both sold before I left," Hannah said, dismayed. All our personal belongings were either packed for the journey west or donated to charity. Where would you have stored important documents? Burke asked. Family papers, deeds, that sort of thing. Hannah thought for a moment. James kept a secure cabinet in his office at the printing house. Most of our important papers were there, though I removed them before the sale. And where are those papers now? Ethan pressed. In my trunk, Hannah replied. The one that burned. In the fire at the lodge. The significance of the lodge fire took on new dimensions with this revelation. If the ledger had been concealed among Hannah's papers, the fire might have accomplished exactly what Blackwood intended, the destruction of evidence that could ruin him. Without the complete ledger, we have no leverage against Blackwood, Burke said, stating the obvious conclusion. This fragment proves something exists, but it's not enough to bring charges. Unless Robert has the rest, Ethan suggested. If he kept the bulk of the evidence himself and only sent Hannah these fragments as insurance, then finding Robert becomes our priority, Burke finished. If he's still alive. Hannah looked between the men, then down at the innocent-seeming wooden toys that had carried hidden secrets across half a continent. Whatever game Robert Garrett had been playing, he had entangled her and her children in a web of deception and danger that continued to tighten around them. We need to send the children away, she said suddenly, the maternal instinct to protect overriding all other concerns. Somewhere Blackwood can't find them. Ethan nodded, relief evident in his expression. He had clearly been considering the same suggestion, but hesitated to voice it. I have connections in Colorado, people who would keep them safe until this is resolved. When? Hannah asked, already calculating what preparations would be needed. Tomorrow, Ethan replied firmly, at first light. Dawn had barely broken when Hannah kissed each of her sleeping children, memorizing their peaceful faces as tears threatened to fall. The decision to separate had been agonizing but necessary. Their safety outweighed all other considerations. Jenkins would transport them to Colorado in a specially modified wagon with hidden compartments, traveling back roads and changing routes to avoid detection. They'll be safe with the Wilsons, Ethan assured her, standing in the doorway as she completed her private farewells. James and Martha were friends of my parents. Their ranch is remote, and they've raised 6 children of their own. The Triplets will want for nothing. Hannah nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. She had written letters for each child to be read to them until they could read the words themselves, explanations, reassurances, and promises that their separation would not be forever. It's time, Ethan said gently. Jenkins needs to be in the foothills by nightfall. With a final caress to each golden head, Hannah allowed herself to be led from the room. Mrs. Peterson would accompany the sleeping children until they were safely away from the broken spur, then return with a trusted ranch hand while Jenkins continued the journey. The fewer people who knew the children's destination, the better their chances of remaining hidden from Blackwood's men. Outside, the pre-dawn air held a crisp chill that matched the coldness Hannah felt spreading through her chest. The carefully prepared wagon stood ready, its team of sturdy horses chosen for endurance rather than speed. Jenkins performed final checks on the harnesses, while 2 armed ranch hands mounted up to serve as escorts for the first leg of the journey. Remember, Ethan instructed Jenkins, no direct routes, no main roads, no towns where you're known. If you're pursued, split up. Martha takes the children off trail while you lead them away. The foreman nodded, his weathered face solemn. We'll get them there safe, boss. Count on it. As the wagon pulled away into the diminishing darkness, Hannah stood rigidly beside Ethan, fighting the instinct to call out, to run after them, to keep her family together despite the dangers. Only when the wagon disappeared from view did she allow herself a single, shuddering sob. Ethan's hand rested briefly on her shoulder. an awkward gesture of comfort from a man unaccustomed to offering solace. "This isn't permanent," he reminded her. "Once Blackwood is dealt with, they'll return." Hannah wiped her eyes with determined fingers. "Then let's deal with him," she said, steel entering her voice. "What's our next step?" Ethan's expression shifted from sympathy to respect at her resolve. "Burke is meeting us at noon. He has a plan." The sheriff arrived as promised, accompanied by a stranger whose city clothes and watchful demeanor marked him as something other than a local lawman. Burke made introductions in the privacy of Ethan's study. "This is Agent Lawrence Reynolds from the Treasury Department," he explained. "He's been investigating Blackwood's operations for months." Reynolds, a trim man with intelligent eyes and a neatly trimmed mustache, nodded acknowledgement. "Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Garrett, Sheriff Burke has shared your situation with me. The fragment you discovered confirms what we've suspected. Blackwood has been running an elaborate land fraud scheme throughout the territory." "Why the Treasury Department's interest?" Hannah inquired. "Blackwood's bank handles federal deposits for the territory," Reynolds explained. "We believe he's been using those funds to finance his fraudulent land acquisitions, then replacing them once properties are resold at higher values. And my cousin Robert discovered this," Ethan surmised. Reynolds nodded. "Based on the dates in our investigation, Robert Garrett, operating as Thomas Crawford, would have been in a position to observe these transactions and access the records." "Is he still alive?" Hannah asked the question that had hovered unspoken. Since Burke's revelations, the agent's hesitation spoke volumes. "We don't know," he admitted finally. "Our informants indicate he disappeared approximately 3 months ago, shortly after beginning correspondence with you, Mrs. Mitchell." The timeline aligned with the period when Thomas Crawford's letters had grown more specific about Hannah's travel plans. If Robert had disappeared then, who had sent the final letters and telegram confirming her arrival date? "Blackwood," Ethan growled, voicing her suspicion. He intercepted the correspondence and continued it to ensure she would come to Clearwater Junction. Reynolds nodded agreement. "We believe Blackwood discovered Robert had been communicating with you and saw an opportunity. By continuing the correspondence, he could lure you west, where you'd be vulnerable and isolated, easier to search or eliminate than in Philadelphia. But he didn't count on her having connections here," Burke added, "or the locket that would lead her to Ethan." The pieces of the elaborate chess game that had brought Hannah west were finally aligning into a coherent pattern. Robert had discovered Blackwood's crimes and taken evidence, the ledger, before disappearing. Somehow, he had learned of his connection to Hannah and initiated correspondence, possibly intending to share the evidence with her or use her as an unwitting courier of fragments, like the one hidden in the wooden bear. When Blackwood discovered this communication, he had continued it to lure Hannah into a trap, never imagining that the locket around her neck would lead her directly to Ethan Garrett, Robert's brother and the one man in the territory with both the resources and motivation to protect her. "What now?" Hannah asked, focusing on the practical rather than dwelling on the manipulations that had entangled her. "The ledger is likely destroyed, and without it, we have no proof of Blackwood's crimes." "Actually," Reynolds said, reaching into his coat, "we have this." He placed a small book on Ethan's desk, a leather-bound ledger with dates matching the period of Blackwood's suspected fraud. "Where did you get that?" Burke demanded, clearly surprised. "It was delivered to our office in Bismarck last week," Reynolds explained, "anonymously, with a note indicating it contained evidence of Blackwood's crimes. Our analysis confirms it details fraudulent transactions involving at least 17 properties." "Robert," Ethan said with certainty. "He must still be alive." "Possibly," Reynolds conceded, "though the handwriting on the note doesn't match samples we have from Crawford's time at the bank." Hannah's mind raced with possibilities. If Robert sent this to the Treasury Department, why continue the charade with me? Why send fragments in children's toys if he already had the complete ledger? Insurance, Ethan suggested. Multiple copies, stored in different locations, ensuring the evidence wouldn't be completely destroyed if Blackwood found one. Or a distraction, Reynolds offered as an alternative. Keeping Blackwood focused on finding you while Robert delivered the actual evidence to authorities. The possibilities were both comforting and disturbing. Comforting that Robert might have been trying to protect Hannah in his way, disturbing that he had risked her safety as part of his scheme. With this evidence, we can arrest Blackwood and dismantle his operation, Reynolds continued, but we need to move carefully. He has connections throughout the territory, including officials who have benefited from his schemes. How do we proceed? Ethan asked, his tone making it clear he expected to be involved. Reynolds outlined the plan, a carefully orchestrated operation to arrest Blackwood and his key associates simultaneously, preventing any from escaping or destroying additional evidence. The Treasury Department had agents positioned in Bismarck awaiting Reynolds' signal. We need someone Blackwood doesn't know to deliver a message that will draw him into the open, the agent explained. Someone he would have no reason to suspect is working with authorities. Me, Hannah realized. You want to use me as bait. Not exactly, Reynolds corrected. We want to use the fragment you found to suggest you have more evidence. A message delivered to Blackwood indicating you're willing to exchange the complete ledger for your safety would draw him out. It's too dangerous, Ethan objected immediately. Blackwood has already tried to kill her once. Not in public, Burke pointed out. If the exchange is arranged in Bismarck in a crowded location with agents positioned throughout. No, Ethan's scarred features hardened. There must be another way. There isn't, Hannah said quietly. Not if we want to end this quickly and bring my children home. She turned to Reynolds. I'll do it, but on one condition. You find Robert, whether he's alive or... She couldn't complete the sentence. I need to know why he involved me in this. The plan proceeded with precision over the next 3 days. A carefully worded message was delivered to Blackwood by a Treasury agent posing as a drifter, suggesting Hannah Mitchell had recovered from the ruins of the Pioneer Lodge a packet containing the complete record of his fraudulent transactions. The message indicated she would exchange this evidence for a signed confession of his crimes and a substantial payment to ensure her future silence. The proposed meeting place was the dining room of Bismarck's Grand Hotel at noon. Public enough to discourage violence, prestigious enough that Blackwood would not seem out of place. Hannah would wear a distinctive blue bonnet with a white ribbon, making her easily identifiable. Ethan objected to every aspect of the plan, but was overruled by both Reynolds and Hannah herself. I didn't travel halfway across the country to cower, while others determine my fate, she told him firmly when they were alone the night before departing for Bismarck. My children deserve a mother who fights for them. Your children deserve a living mother, Ethan countered, pacing the study like a caged predator. Blackwood is desperate. Desperate men take risks. So do desperate women, Hannah replied softly. I have no choice, Ethan. This is the only way to ensure we're truly safe. The morning of the meeting dawned clear and cold. Hannah dressed with hair in the blue traveling suit Mrs. Peterson had altered for her, pinning the borrowed bonnet with its distinctive ribbon at precisely the angle Reynolds had suggested for optimal visibility. Beneath her composed exterior, her heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination. Ethan remained silent during their journey into Bismarck, his scarred features set in grim lines that discouraged conversation. He had insisted on accompanying her to the city, despite Reynolds' concern that his distinctive appearance might alert Blackwood's people. In the end, they had compromised. Ethan would remain outside the hotel, positioned to intervene if necessary, but not visible from the dining room. The Grand Hotel lived up to its name, with an imposing facade and elegantly appointed lobby. Reynolds, disguised as a traveling businessman, nodded almost imperceptibly as Hannah entered precisely at 11:45. Other agents were positioned throughout the space, as a porter, a desk clerk, two businessmen in conversation near the stairs. Burke waited in a room upstairs, ready to provide official territorial authority for the arrests. Hannah proceeded to the dining room, where a table had been reserved in her name near the center of the space. As instructed, she placed a small leather folder on the table, containing blank papers but appearing to hold the promised evidence. Then she waited, outwardly calm, while her pulse thrummed in her ears. At precisely noon, a well-dressed man entered the dining room. William Blackwood proved to be younger than Hannah had imagined, perhaps 40, with carefully groomed hair and a diamond stickpin in his cravat that spoke of considerable wealth. His cold eyes scanned the room before settling on her blue bonnet. With a confidence that bordered on arrogance, he approached her table. "Mrs. Mitchell, I presume," he said smoothly, taking the seat opposite without waiting for an invitation. "Or should I say Mrs. Crawford?" "You know very well who I am," Hannah replied evenly, "just as I now know who you are and what you've done." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "What I've done is create prosperity in this territory, a concept that seems to escape federal bureaucrats and their outdated regulations. What you've done is steal land from 17 families through forged documents and fraudulent transactions," Hannah countered, her voice low but firm, "using federal deposits to finance your schemes." A flicker of surprise crossed Blackwood's features before his composed mask returned. "Interesting allegations. I assume you have evidence in that folder." He reached toward it. Hannah placed her hand atop the leather case. "Not so quickly, Mr. Blackwood. First, your confession and the payment we discussed." "You're in no position to make demands," Blackwood replied, his tone hardening. "Your supposed cousin Robert learned that lesson. You should have as well after the fire and the unfortunate incident at Garrett's ranch." The casual reference to Robert sent a chill through Hannah. "What did you do to him?" Blackwood's smile widened fractionally. "Let's just say he's no longer concerned with territorial banking practices." He reached inside his jacket, and Hannah tensed, fearing a weapon. Instead, he withdrew an envelope. "Your payment, as requested. Now the evidence." As Hannah reached for the envelope, the prearranged signal that Blackwood had implicated himself, Reynolds, and two other agents approached the table. "William Blackwood, you're under arrest for bank fraud, embezzlement of federal funds, and conspiracy to commit murder," Reynolds announced, displaying his credentials. Blackwood's face contorted with fury as he realized the trap. With surprising speed for a banker, he lunged across the table, grabbing for Hannah's throat. She jerked backward, her chair tipping precariously as his fingers grazed her collar. Before he could reach her, a powerful figure appeared beside the table. Ethan seized Blackwood's arm, twisting it behind the banker's back with such force that the smaller man gasped in pain. "Touch her again and lose the arm," Ethan growled, his scarred face inches from Blackwood's. "Where is my brother?" Terror replaced anger in Blackwood's eyes as he found himself immobilized by the rancher's iron grip. "Garrett's Gorge," he gasped. "The old mining cabin. But you're too late. He's been there for months." Reynolds nodded to his agents, who moved forward to place Blackwood in custody. "We'll send men to the location immediately," he assured Ethan. "If Robert is there—" "I'm going," Ethan stated, brooking no argument. "Now." 4 hours later, Hannah paced the small room Burke had secured at the sheriff's office, waiting for news. Ethan had departed immediately with Reynolds and a contingent of deputies, leaving her to assist in documenting Blackwood's confession once the banker realized the extent of evidence against him. The door opened, and Burke entered, his expression unreadable, They found the cabin, he said without preamble. Robert was there. Hannah's heart clenched. Was? Is, Burke corrected. Alive, though in poor condition. Blackwood had been keeping him prisoner, trying to force him to reveal where all copies of the ledger were hidden. Relief flooded through Hannah, followed immediately by concern. How badly is he hurt? Malnourished, some injuries from interrogation, Burke replied, but the doctor says he'll recover with proper care. Ethan's bringing him to town now. 2 days later, Hannah stood beside Robert Garrett's hospital bed, studying the face that matched the photograph she had carried in her locket. Despite his ordeal, the family resemblance to Ethan was striking, the same strong jaw and direct gaze, though without the scarring that marked his older brother. "I never meant for you to be in danger," Robert said, his voice still weak from months of deprivation. The correspondence was genuine at first. When I discovered we were cousins, I thought fate had provided a perfect solution. Solution to what? Hannah asked, still struggling to reconcile this man with the elaborate deception that had brought her west. To ensuring Blackwood's crimes were exposed while keeping the evidence safe, Robert explained. I knew he suspected me of taking the ledger. It was only a matter of time before he moved against me. The fragments I sent in the children's toys were insurance, proof the complete ledger existed, hidden where he couldn't find it. But why involve me and my children? Why not simply send the evidence to authorities? Robert had the grace to look ashamed. I tried, but Blackwood had connections in every territorial office. My first attempt was intercepted, the agent killed. I needed someone beyond his influence to eventually ensure the evidence reached the right hands. So you decided to marry me under false pretenses? Hannah couldn't keep the hurt from her voice. The deception was in my identity, not my intentions, Robert insisted. Everything else, my desire to provide a home for you and the children, my plans for our future together, was genuine. He reached for her hand. I meant every word, Hannah. I just couldn't sign my real name. Hannah withdrew her hand gently but firmly. You can't build a life on lies, Robert, no matter how well-intentioned. From the doorway, Ethan's voice cut through the tension. Hannah's right. Trust, once broken, isn't easily restored. Robert's expression fell as he recognized the judgment. In his brother's eyes, I did what I thought necessary to survive and bring a criminal to justice. At what cost? Ethan asked quietly. The question hung unanswered as Hannah excused herself, needing space to process all that had occurred. She walked through Bismarck's busy streets, thinking about choices and consequences, Robert's decision to involve her in his dangerous game, her own decision to trust a stranger's letters, even Ethan's choice to help her despite the complications she had brought to his carefully ordered life. 2 weeks later, with Blackwood awaiting trial and his network of corruption exposed throughout the territory, Hannah stood on the porch of the Broken Spur's main house, watching the approaching wagon with her heart in her throat. Jenkins had sent word 3 days earlier. The children were safe and would be returning home. Nervous? Ethan asked, joining her on the porch. Terrified, Hannah admitted. What if they're angry about the separation? What if they've changed in ways I can't understand? Ethan's scarred features softened into a rare smile. Children are remarkably resilient. You said so yourself. As the wagon drew closer, 3 small figures became visible, their golden heads catching the afternoon sunlight. Before Jenkins had fully stopped the team, the triplets were scrambling down, racing toward the porch with cries of, "Mama! Mama!" Hannah ran to meet them, falling to her knees as they collided with her in a tangle of small arms and joyful tears. She gathered them close, breathing in their familiar scents, marveling at how they seemed both exactly the same and somehow older. "We helped with real cows, Mama," Samuel exclaimed. "And rode ponies," Sarah added. "But we missed you every day," Sophie concluded, her small face solemn. "I missed you too," Hannah whispered. "More than I can possibly explain." Over the children's heads, she met Ethan's gaze. He stood watching from the porch, his expression holding something she hadn't seen before. Contentment, perhaps, or hope. In the weeks of working together to resolve the Blackwood situation and ensure Robert received proper medical care, their relationship had evolved from cautious alliance to genuine friendship. That evening, with the children finally asleep after hours of excited storytelling about their adventures, Hannah joined Ethan on the porch. Stars scattered across the vast Dakota sky, more brilliant than she had ever seen in Philadelphia. "What will you do now?" Ethan asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Return east?" Hannah considered the question that had occupied her thoughts, increasingly as the immediate danger receded. "No," she said with quiet certainty. "There's nothing for us in Philadelphia. The children are thriving here, and She hesitated. "I've found something I never expected." "And what's that?" Ethan asked, his voice carefully neutral. "A place where I belong," Hannah replied simply. "A home." Ethan's expression remained unreadable in the dim light. "And Robert, he's asked to court you properly once he's recovered. No deception this time." Hannah shook her head. "I'm grateful for his remorse, but trust, as you said, isn't easily restored. The connection I feel is—" She paused, gathering courage before meeting his gaze directly. "It's not with Robert." Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes, followed by a vulnerability that transformed his scarred features. Slowly, giving her ample opportunity to withdraw, he reached for her hand. "The locket did lead you where you belong," he said softly. "Just not in the way anyone expected." Hannah's fingers interlaced with his, the connection as natural as breathing. "Two halves of one whole," she murmured, recalling the inscription that had brought them together. Above them, stars continued their eternal dance across the Dakota sky, witnessing the beginning of a story that had started with deception, but now promised something far more enduring, a truth built on shared challenges, mutual respect, and the unexpected recognition of kindred spirits who had found each other against impossible odds. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.